She was just the cleaning lady, until the bank director collapsed and only she knew what to do. What happens when a janitor saves the life of a bank director, only to be dragged into HR instead of being thanked? You won't believe how her story flipped corporate America and gave a voice to the ones who were never supposed to speak. If you were to ask Tanisha Moore the exact moment her world flipped like a rigged deck of cards, she wouldn't blink or hesitate. It was 8:43 on a Monday morning in the middle of March. That was the minute she stopped being just the cleaning lady and became a problem. Not for the community, not for the people she actually helped, but for the crisp shirt, tightly knotted tie folks over at Freedom Bank. Oh yes, she became a problem for them real quick, and the day had started like any other. Tanisha stepped into the building with the look of a woman who had no time for nonsense and even less for flattery. Her uniform was hospital white, clashing harshly against the marble lobby, as if daring the polished walls to say something. A plastic cap barely covered her braids. Disposable gloves clung to her hands like second skin. A broom in one hand, a mop slung over her shoulder like a warrior's staff, and a ring of keys jingling at her hip. If Joan of Arc had worn rubber soles and carried a bleach bucket, she might have looked something like this. 15 minutes before the bank opened. No customers yet, no gawkers, just her and the quiet. Her domain wasn't the boardroom or the executive lounge. It was linoleum floors and bleach fumes. Her mission, stay invisible, get it done, and don't interrupt the big people while they pretend to change the world with spreadsheets and espresso. But Tanisha, she was never just the janitor. She was a future paramedic, a med school student who studied anatomy between double shifts while her little sister fell asleep to the whine of a faulty radiator. Her hands already knew the rhythm of chest compressions. Her eyes could spot the blank stare of unconsciousness before most folks even noticed something was wrong. And her voice? Loud enough to call death out by name if she had to. She just didn't expect to use it that day. Tanisha was wiping down a fingerprint-smudged glass door when Clyde Robertson, branch director, crown prince of quarterly earnings, strutted past. Tall, silver-haired, draped in a suit that probably cost more than her rent, he gave her the kind of nod that says, "I see you, but only because you're in my way." She nodded back, the way they trained you. Polite, quiet, forgettable. He walked 10 steps and then dropped like a sack of cement. No warning, no groan, just down, face first on the tile, arms askew like someone hit the off switch. It wasn't the security guard who moved first, or the assistant manager, not the teller who screamed and backed into the coffee machine. It was Tanisha. She dropped the rag, flung off her gloves, and lunged forward. Clyde wasn't breathing. Pulse, gone. Skin, ash gray, colder by the second. Eyes rolled back like the last thing they saw was his Rolex. Cardiac arrest, right there. In front of God, surveillance cameras, and a group of white-collar professionals who'd sooner draft a memo than move a muscle. "I need space," she shouted. "He's not breathing. I'm starting CPR." Her knees hit the floor, hands in position. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. Down. Push. Don't stop. Her brain clicked into gear like a switchboard operator in a storm. No hesitation. No asking for permission, because dead men don't give it. One of the guards stepped forward, confusion wrinkling his forehead. "Ma'am, you can't touch the client." She didn't look up. "Do you want him to die?" "Move." He backed off. 30 seconds in. Nothing. 45. A minute. A voice behind her muttered, "You're gonna get fired for this." But Tanisha wasn't listening. She was counting. She was breathing. And then, a gasp. Shallow, raspy, but real. Clyde Robertson's chest rose. His fingers twitched. Silence fell like a curtain. She tilted his head, checked the airway, stabilized his neck. The man had a pulse, weak but stubborn, like her. And that's when the assistant manager appeared, balding, red-faced, and walking like the hallway owed him money. "You weren't authorized," he snapped. "You should have stepped away. You're the janitor, not medical staff." Tanisha stood up slowly, her uniform stained, her gloves somewhere near the ficus. Her eyes locked with his like two chess players at the last move. "I'm the woman who kept your boss alive," she said flatly. "If I'd waited for your precious authorization, you'd be updating his LinkedIn to deceased." Paramedics arrived 8 minutes later. Too late to save him, but not too late to transport the man Tanisha had already pulled back from the edge. She didn't stick around for applause. By the time the gurney rolled out, she was back by her mop bucket, knees bent, head low, hands trembling, not from fear, from fury, because she knew what came next. The supply closet always smelled like bleach and resignation. That morning it smelled like both, with a hint of betrayal. Tanisha sat on an overturned crate, breathing into her palms when her phone buzzed. "Your day off has been canceled." Report tomorrow. HR requests your presence at 10 a.m. Human resources, of course. They weren't going to say, we're firing you for outshining us. Number, they'd call it protocol. She showed up the next day, early, crisp, wearing the same white uniform, but with her chin lifted high enough to cut glass. Behind the desk sat Ms. Renata, HR director, queen of insincere smiles and weaponized courtesy. Tanisha, she said, drawing out the name like it had too many syllables. You violated several internal procedures. Physical contact with a client without supervisory clearance. Deviation from emergency policy. He was dead, Tanisha interrupted. You're not certified. I've got a CPR license and a working heart. What else did you need? A signed permission slip? Renata sighed. Not in disagreement, just in exhaustion. The kind you use when a decision's already made. She slid a form across the table. Voluntary resignation. Clean file. Recommendation letter. Sign it, and this ends peacefully. Peacefully. That's what they call it when they shove you out the door and act like they're doing you a favor. Tanisha stared at the paper, then at Renata's face. She didn't sign. Outside, the sky was the color of dust. She looked up at the bank's logo. Freedom Bank. Yeah, okay. Freedom for who? At the bus stop, she pulled out her phone and typed, I saved a man's life today. 2 hours later, I was summoned to HR. Apparently, being a black woman who knows what she's doing is threatening. No thanks, no handshake, just a soft goodbye in a hard voice. 5 likes, 10, then a retweet, then a journalist. And just like that, the part they tried to erase was now the only part anyone wanted to read. It hadn't even been 24 hours since Tanisha Moore's post spread across the internet like dry grass meeting a blowtorch. By the time the sun came up the next morning, it had been reposted more than 40,000 times. 100,000 people had tapped like. Thousands more flooded the comments, adding their own bruises to the pile. I worked in banking too, left because of racism. She's a hero. The rest of you, just plain hypocrites. Freedom Bank? Free from what exactly? Morals? While the world online caught fire, out here, in the thin, dusty quiet of her one-bedroom apartment, Tanisha sat on the linoleum floor, cradling a cup of dollar store ramen like it was fine china. The fluorescent light above her flickered like it was nervous. In one hand, she held a fork. In the other, a letter. It was from the city's Department of Employee Conduct and Crisis Evaluation. Summons to appear for psychological evaluation following deviation from institutional policy in a high-stress public incident. That's how they worded it. See, when you're a black woman who saves a white man's life, you don't get thank you luncheons or plaques. No spotlight, no flowers. You get dragged in front of a committee and asked if you were mentally stable enough to intervene. Well now, she murmured into her phone, her voice halfway between tired and disgusted. Doesn't that sound like appreciation? Her sister was on the other end, silent for a few seconds. They can't be serious, she finally said. Oh, they're dead serious. This is their way of saying, you sure you weren't too eager to save somebody's life? That silence came again, heavier this time. You did the right thing, T, her sister said. But you know how they operate. Tanisha did know. That was the worst part. She knew exactly how they operated. This wasn't a fluke. This was a formula. The next morning someone knocked. Now Tanisha wasn't expecting company, unless you counted the city trying to collect some overdue utility payment. But when she cracked the door, she didn't see an envelope or a clipboard. She saw a man in a sharp suit holding a briefcase like it contained classified secrets. He was clean, precise, the kind of man who usually didn't walk past her front porch without a reason that involved a neighborhood watch alert. Ms. Moore? He asked with a voice smooth as courtroom jazz. I'm Justin Carter. I represent Mr. Clyde Robertson. He'd like to speak with you, personally. She raised an eyebrow and leaned on the doorframe, arms crossed. Robertson? The same Robertson I dragged off death's doorstep while y'all stood around blinking? Yes, ma'am, Carter said. He's recovering because of you. And he wants to talk. He's not the one who had you fired. That last part stopped her cold. Come again? There are things you need to know, Carter said. But not in a hallway. Please, give me 15 minutes of your time. They met in a glass-walled conference room in one of those uptown towers, where the air smelled like roasted coffee beans and unspoken privilege. Tanisha had never sat in a chair this soft before. And across from her, in another chair, half sunk into a leather cocoon, sat Clyde Robertson. His skin was pale, his frame thinner than before. A portable oxygen mask rested against his face, but when he saw her, he pulled it away. Ms. Moore, he said, his voice raspy but sincere, I owe you more than I can ever say, but I owe you something else too. The truth. And then he laid it bare. His second in command, Mr. Grayson, The same man who had frozen in place while Tanisha performed CPR had wasted no time after Clyde was carted out. Within hours, he began what he called a containment strategy. He fired her without warning, drafted a report framing her as a non-credentialed employee who engaged in unsanctioned conduct, claimed she had caused panic among clients, and acted beyond her assigned duties. Panic, Tanisha repeated, biting back a laugh. What? Was me saving your life more upsetting than you dropping like a stone in your overpriced shoes? Clyde looked down, embarrassed, ashamed. He thought he was protecting the bank's image, Clyde said, but what he really did was bury your bravery, and I let him. That's on me. Tanisha's stare was steady. You let it happen because I'm not white. Say it. Clyde nodded, slowly, painfully. Yes, and that's exactly why I'm not staying silent anymore. Online, the storm wasn't dying down. It was intensifying. Tanisha was getting interview requests from local news, radio stations, even a few national networks. Podcasts were already calling her the CPR queen, but she said no to all of it. Not yet. Not until she had her facts straight. Not until she had more than just a feeling, because feelings didn't get justice. Receipts did. That's when Adam showed up, a 20-something intern with the face of someone who'd seen too much and said too little. He had hesitation in his shoulders, but fire behind his eyes. I saw the internal thread, he said, voice quiet but clear. They were talking about how to bury your story. One exec suggested leaking to the press that you falsified your CPR certification. Wait, what? They said you lied about your training, that you jeopardized a client's life. But I saved the emails, all of them. Screenshots, headers, everything. He handed her his phone. Her eyes moved fast. There it was. Emails between executives, plotting damage control, worded like lawyers on a chessboard. I was scared, Adam admitted. But then I figured, what am I scared of? Them, or the fact that silence makes me part of it? Tanisha looked at him, seeing not a scared kid, but the start of a revolution. This is how they break us, she said. Not by screaming, but by making us whisper. But not Adam, not this time. Back at Freedom Bank, the corporate boardroom was cracking under pressure. The PR director was sweating through his collar. Legal advisors were flipping through handbooks. One executive mumbled something about redirecting the media cycle. Another suggested offering Tanisha a settlement with a non-disclosure agreement. Someone else even whispered about quietly terminating Grayson to reset the narrative. And then Clyde Robertson entered the Zoom meeting. No warning, no prep, just the man himself, on camera, with Tanisha Moore sitting right beside him, in the frame, alive, unbothered. This is who you need to be speaking to, he said plainly, and you don't get to set the terms. The very next morning, Tanisha signed papers. Not for silence, but for truth. Her agreement launched an independent ethics investigation within the bank. It also led to the formation of a racial equity committee with actual authority, not just a checkbox. And one more thing, she demanded a public apology, not for herself. She didn't need it, but because she wanted every little black girl who read her story to know one thing loud and clear: when you do the right thing, you should never be punished for it. If anyone thought Tanisha Moore's name would fade from memory like some passing Twitter trend, they clearly didn't understand one hard truth. Once a black woman stands up from the floor, where she's been cleaning someone else's mess, she never sits back down the same way. Because when the director of a major bank sits on national television and says your name, says it like it means something, calls you an example of civic courage, it shifts things. When thousands of strangers, some with barely enough to pay rent, donate to your med school tuition, that changes things too. When even old Miss Loretta, your neighbor who's never had a kind word for anyone but her cat, looks you dead in the eye and says, "Baby, I always knew you'd rise." That's when you realize the ground beneath your feet has shifted. But not everyone wants to let go of the past that easily. The system doesn't roll over just because a hashtag trended. It fights. It claws back. "Are you absolutely sure you want to go through with this?" the lawyer asked her, the one with perfect teeth, a three-piece suit, and hands that had never scrubbed anything but a wine glass. Tanisha looked him straight in the eye. "I'm sure, because if I don't stand now, tomorrow they'll fire the next girl, and the day after that, the one who's even quieter than I used to be." And so it began. The lawsuit, Moore versus Freedom Bank, was scheduled for Wednesday. Public hearing, cameras permitted, press credentialed, every seat in the courthouse filled. On one side sat the bank's legal team, men in suits that screamed Harvard and hush money, with faces like someone had canceled their golf retreat in the Hamptons. On the other side, Tanisha, in a plain gray suit, posture straight as rebar, voice sharp enough to leave paper cuts. "I didn't come here for money," she began. I came so this country would hear it loud. A woman who saves a life should not lose her job over her skin color or the lack of a diploma, especially when she was the only one in the room who knew what to do. Then came the witnesses. Adam, the intern, took the stand. Calm, honest, brave. He showed the judge those internal emails, the ones where Tanisha was labeled unmanageable, a liability to our image. Not a person, not a value, an image. The judge, a gray-haired man with eyebrows that looked like they'd been through wars, leaned forward. So, he said slowly, you fired a woman for saving your colleague's life in the name of protecting your image? The bank's attorney stammered something about protocol and unauthorized access to client bodies. The judge gave him a look like he just suggested the sky was plaid. Young man, the judge said dryly, I was a paramedic before I ever wore this robe. You're going to tell me CPR is a violation of customer boundaries? The courtroom chuckled, but Tanisha didn't. She sat still, not smug, not smiling, just present, solid. She didn't win the case in dollars. She won it in headlines, in precedent, in voice. Her case became a citation, an example in HR handbooks. All over the country, banks and corporations began rewriting emergency response policies. LinkedIn feeds lit up with posts about restructuring response protocol. Freedom Bank, under pressure, created a new position, Director of Ethics and Inclusion. Guess who got the job? Yep, her first day on the new floor was nothing short of surreal. She walked down the same hallway where people used to pretend not to see her, where they asked her not to linger at the coffee machine. Now those same folks nodded and smiled like they'd always believed in her. Hypocrisy is a flexible thing, but Tanisha wasn't one to forget. She reached her office, yes, her office, and opened her inbox. Among the admin tasks and meeting invites sat an email from a woman named Rashida in Minneapolis. I work in banking too. I'm black. I once saved a life, and they told me not to make waves. You gave me the courage to make them. Tanisha read the email twice, then a third time. She didn't cry, but her breath caught in her throat. She dragged it into a folder labeled Seeds, because real change doesn't grow from speeches. It grows from seeds like that. Week 2. She called in Mr. Grayson. Yes, that Grayson, the one who fired her. He walked in like a man approaching Judgment Day. The color drained from his face before he even sat down. Sit, Tanisha said, not lifting her eyes from the document she was reviewing. He sat, so quiet the chair didn't dare creak. You fired me, she said evenly, because I did what you were too scared to do. Not because I was wrong, but because I was too black, too competent, and too visible. Correct? He opened his mouth, some apology, some denial. Who knows? But she held up her hand. Don't bother. I'm not firing you. I'm transferring you. Customer service desk, Bronx branch. Let's see how long you last in a space where ignoring black women is not an option. His lips moved, but nothing came out. She offered a small smile. Not cruel, but undeniable. A year later, Tanisha stood on a stage in Atlanta. 4,000 people in the audience. Activists, students, CEOs, HR directors trying to prove they got it. She wore a burgundy dress, hair pinned up, face calm but commanding. The cameras flashed, she didn't blink. I was the janitor no one saw, she said, until I became the threat no one knew how to handle. Not because I yelled, but because I did the right thing, and the system didn't know how to file that. Applause exploded like thunder, but she raised her hand, and the room hushed again. My story isn't rare. It's not a miracle. It's a diagnosis, and the microscope is finally on the disease. I'm not the destination. I'm the beginning. So don't just hear me. Listen to the ones still silent. That night she returned home. Her sister had dinner ready. Chicken and rice on the stove, one flickering candle on the table. You famous now? Her sister teased. Tanisha sat down, folded her napkin and smiled. No, she said. I'm heard now. They ate in quiet peace. The city hummed beyond their window, its noise softened by distance. But inside, for the first time in a long time, Tanisha didn't feel like she was fighting to be seen. She didn't feel victorious. She felt steady, whole, because no matter what happened next, they couldn't take the most important thing from her anymore. Her name, her dignity, and her right to stay visible.